Okay, we're live.
Okay, we're live. Okay, welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Governor's Salary Commission. We have a variety of appointees here today. Everybody here is from the Senate: Jamar Brown, Eleanor Carey, Bruce Plaxton, and we have the Speaker of the House's 3 appointments as well: Bruce Poole, Lindsay Reynolds, and Chuck Tilden. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve McCullough, who's going to go over some interesting data and information about some of the previous Governor's Salary Commission cycles. But first, I'm going to share the screen so we can all see what we're looking at. So,
And I also like to point out that we also have Treasurer Kopp as an ex officio member, and for her last Governor's Salary Commission, at least in her capacity as an ex officio. Maybe we'll see you in the future.
Oh, I trust not. Sorry.
That's okay. You certainly paid your dues.
okay, so can everyone see the material? Okay, great.
Looking good.
Okay, sounds good. Whenever you're ready, Steve.
Yep, go ahead to the next page, which is the, sorry, did you have the agenda up on the screen on?
Oh, yeah, we can.
There we go. Let's start with there. So good afternoon, everybody. Steve McCullough with the Department of Legislative Services. This is my 4th, I believe, Governor's Salary Commission that I'm get a staff. But you've been interacting mostly with Ken Weaver, who will be the future of the Governor's Salary Commission staffing. But today we are going to go over some organizational items that involves choosing a member chairman among the members, review the constitutional and legal issues. We'll talk about the prior Salary Commission recommendations for the past two cycles. And then we'll have some data that we present showing on compensation principles, comparative data between states for various positions. And then basically at the end of the meeting, we'll open up for discussion. Commission, if you have questions or things that you would like us to research for the next meeting, and then scheduling the next meeting would be the kind of the final order of business today. In the past, this commission has generally been able to finish its work just in 2 meetings, but there's no requirement that that be so. If you need, more than 2 meetings, we can accommodate that as well. So go ahead and flip next slide. Okay, so we might as well, if people are ready to discuss this, select a chairman. And this is, we can do it either somebody can make a motion or nominate somebody. Usually it's done collegially, as we have a couple members who've been on commissions before and also have served as chairman. So I guess we open it to the floor if anybody has a suggestion at this point.
Ellie, would you be willing to serve as chair?
I was wondering whether Bruce would, since he did it last time.
Well,
I'm happy to do it, but if someone else feels strongly they want to do it, I will cede my chairmanship.
Plaxton, we're with you, bud. Right behind.
Great job.
So it sounds like there is, I guess, unanimous consent that Mr. Plaxton will once again reprise his role as chairman.
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Very good.
Thank you for your confidence. I looked on the website right before getting on this call, and it says I'm already chair
They knew.
for this term. So
I think the Maryland manual has not been updated. They kind of.
well, no, it has all the new appointees through 2024. But
I think they probably assumed, since they saw that now it is official. Mr. Chairman, welcome aboard. So with your concurrence, we'll go ahead and talk about get the housework out of the way in terms of the requirements for the commission, et cetera. As you can see on the second bullet point on this slide, I think most of you are aware, commission members need to be sworn in by the clerk of the court. I believe you've gotten that information in the letters of appointment. If you haven't, after this meeting, we will speak with you further and make sure that you have the information you need to go and do that. Members are eligible. This is members serve uncompensated, but you are eligible for reimbursement. Obviously, we're not traveling much, so the mileage doesn't apply. But if we go into the dinner hour and you wish to order out, the state will reimburse you. The only thing that this commission is charged to do in the Constitution is to recommend a level of compensation for the governor and the lieutenant governor. However, in the past, the commission has received requests from the governor to also make recommendations for the other constitutional officers, those being the Attorney General, the Comptroller, the Treasurer, the Secretary of State. That did not occur last cycle, and as of now, we have received no request at this point from the governor's office to do that. But we have prepared comparative data for those positions in the event that this commission decides or is asked to do that or otherwise. In terms of other items, go ahead and next slide. In terms of running the meeting, concurrence of at least 5 members are required for any formal action of the commission. The commission, if you make a recommendation, it is required that there be a written recommendation to the executive and legislature within 10 days of the start of the session, which starts next January 12th. So by the 22nd, the recommendation would need to be submitted. The commission may not recommend a salary lower than the current salaries. And even if the commission does recommend increases, the General Assembly may accept or reduce or reject those recommendations, although the General Assembly itself may not adopt a salary that is lower than the current salaries being paid to each of those positions. If there is no recommendation for an increase, then there is no joint resolution necessary to be introduced at the session, and there will be no increase because the General Assembly may not propose a higher level than the commission recommends. Right? And also, if anybody has any questions at any time, please just speak up. I think there's few enough that you probably don't even need to raise hands.
Steve, I have a question. I just don't remember in years past. The other constitutional officers, did we request of the governor that he make a request, or how?
No, I think it was, as long as I've been involved in staffing it, it was just a tradition. I'm not sure why the first one, when it started, but that is only a that was a request by an outside body. It had no force of law. The General Assembly could ignore that one.
Right.
Assembly, and the same way in terms of the General Assembly cannot lower those constitutional salaries, but they can raise them at any time, although any new salary that is passed in statute would not take effect until a new term began or a new office holder began office. So that is slightly different, whereas for the governor, lieutenant governor, that is in the form of a joint resolution. The other constitutional officers are simply in statute, and it takes a bill, which could be done at any point, but the General Assembly has tended to do it lockstep with these other salary commissions.
A package. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Steve, my
Yes.
recollection was that this is with the treasurer this is my third time. I don't know. The treasurer has probably been on many more than me, but in 2014 or 2013, when we met, in effect for 2014, we made recommendations of all the constitutional officers and they were all accepted. So they did go in a bill. And in addition to raising the governor and lieutenant governor, we raised the attorney general, the comptroller, and the treasurer. And for anyone who hasn't read the reports closely, in 2018, there were no raises. So for no one has gotten a raise for 4 years.
And we will be covering that data actually on the next couple slides.
Okay.
So on this slide, as the chairman just stated, there were recommendations for no increases, and so no action was taken or needed. Next slide, please. In the cycle prior to that, the commission did recommend increase to the salaries and recommended an increase on a yearly basis over the 4 years. And you can see those listed here, where the first year, $165,000 for the governor. I believe the previous level had been $150, and there hadn't been any for a number of years. And then just stepping it up. At the time, it was kind of loosely based on increases to the CPI that had occurred since the last time the salaries had been raised. The lieutenant governors also raised kind of in lockstep, but at a lower level. Obviously, the governor, as you'll hear in a minute, in compensation principles, the top position probably should be the top paid position. Go ahead and next slide. And in that 2013 salary commission, the request had been made, and the commission did consider the other salaries. The attorney general, comptroller, and treasurer salaries are all the same, and those were also recommended and adopted for increase at the same level. The Secretary of State has always been at a lower level under the kind of the theory that that is a lesser position, less responsibility. It's a very much smaller office. And so the salaries there you see, but again, the same type of increase was applied for the Secretary of State position during the 2013 commission as well. Next slide. In the past, the commissions have discussed other aspects of compensation. That includes retiree health, pension. You can see on the slide that retiree health was set so that vesting immediately upon assuming office and accruing 1/16 of the maximum state subsidy for each year served. That basically puts it on the same level as how state employees accrue. At that time, a state employee would accrue a fully vest in 16 years. So this simply put for retiree health benefits on that level. In terms of the governor's pension, a number of commissions ago, a recommendation was made and legislation was adopted, which basically pegged the current governor's pension, obviously a former governor now receives a percentage of the current governor's salary, and that is depending on the number of terms served. So a one-term governor now receives, upon reaching age 55, reaching age 62, it was increased from 55, receives 1/3 of the current governor's salary, and a two-term former governor would receive 50% of the pension. So because that is now kind of indexed to the current things, unless a commission member feels strongly, there's really not much reason to make any adjustments or recommendations based on the pension.
Steve, I think you meant 25% for one term.
Is it 25? I thought it was a third, but I'm sorry, you're probably correct. I will double check that, but
It's 4/16.
Are you talking retiree health or the pension?
The pension, I thought was 25% as well.
I believe it was 33 and 50, but we'll verify that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, not a problem, but I guess the takeaway is, again, that since it's been pegged to the current salary, there's automatic pension increases for former governors whenever the current governor's salary goes up. So there is less of a need to, on a periodic basis, examine the pension, benefits for former governors, because that's kind of been indexed to the current set. Okay, go ahead and next slide. And this is where I'm going to hand it off now to Ken.
Hey, thank you, Steve. So again, we're going to talk about compensation principles. I'm going to be speaking about the relationship of the governor and lieutenant governor salaries as we compare that to other Maryland officials. And we will also be kind of taking general stock of the idea as to whether the salary is sufficient enough to attract highly qualified individuals. So we're going to have 14 exhibits to go through. We're going to take our time on each one. If anyone has any questions at any time, feel free to speak up. Don't worry about raising your hand because I can't see everybody on the screen anyway. And then also this goes back to what Steve had spoken about before. The governor can send a letter requesting that the other constitutional officers beyond the governor and lieutenant governor can get additional compensation. But again, no such letter or request has been made during this cycle. So let's jump right into it with exhibit number 1. This is state employee compensation history. These are basically all of the general salary increases, increments, and other compensation beginning in fiscal 2003 until now. Pretty much the pertinent information here is to look at the left-hand side of the column beginning in 2019. So beginning in 2019, 2020, and 2021, cumulatively, state employees have received an 8.5% increase in their salary, whereas the governor, lieutenant governor, and also other constitutional officers, the governor and lieutenant governor, and the other main constitutional officers have not received that. So just as a point of comparison there. And then when we look at exhibit number 2, the salaries of selected Maryland state officials, you can see the most recent all the way for 2022. So you can see that the governor's salary is at $180,000. You can see the column all the way to the far right. Again, as we've said before, there's been zero change in these constitutional officer salaries from 2019. And again, this actually goes back to 2013 because that's when they made the decision, as Steve said, to increase these salaries. So it's been quite some time since such a decision has been made. If you look at the second section, we can see the deputy constitutional officers. So when you look at the attorney general, at the deputy comptroller and the deputy treasurer, and you look all the way here to the far right, they actually make more money than the main people in those positions because of how the salary has been compensated. So
They earn it too.
Indeed, indeed. So that's just, another piece to consider there. At the bottom, there is the full scope of salary increases the judiciary has seen as well. On the third page of this exhibit, these are the cabinet secretaries. So this just gives you a general idea of what the main secretaries at all of our main agencies are making. And again, as you can see from the change column all the way to the far right, they have also received generally about an increase on par with all of the state employees, of course, which is around between 8 and 9%. There's some standouts there over to the right as well, like the superintendent of schools, et cetera. Did someone have a comment?
And also state police, is that accurate? 56.99% increase?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, it is. So we've definitely seen a scope of changes in terms of the cabinet secretaries as well, especially when you compare it again to the 0% change with the governor and lieutenant governor salaries. So we're going to expand the scope out a little bit more in exhibit number 3. This deals with the mayor and county executive salaries. So again, just a general idea of what they're making in 2022. Probably the most important column to look at is the fourth column, the percentage change between 2018 and 2022 for these various officers. we are basically looking at a 5.6% increase on average in these particular counties, the biggest counties in the state, of course. Now, exhibit number 4, this goes into detail about what Steve had just mentioned, the comparison of Maryland state retirement and pension plans. The governor is in the second column. So as Steve said, a lot of the structural changes have already been completed with something like this. And any other further changes are pegged to the governor's salary in terms of the compensation side of retirement. So again, there wouldn't really be much impetus to make a change with these. But as we scan through, you can see what the changes have been since the 2013 cycle up until now. So if anybody has any questions on these, we can go back through these as well. So moving on for exhibit 5. So from here on out, we're going to be looking at a comparison with all of the other states. So exhibit number 5 shows the salary of the constitutional officers across the top and all of the states on the left-hand side in alphabetical order. So we can see Maryland at the middle of the page there, but I'm going to skip down out of that quickly because we're going to compare it to the states in order of salary rank. So again, that's just a quick look. But exhibit number 6 gives us a little more to look into here. So when you look at the 2021 salary in the middle of the page, we can see Maryland is at number 9 in the country with this $180,000 salary for the governor. Again, this has been a 2.9% change in the past 4 years. If we pretty much look at how this shakes out in terms of the other states, another easier way to look at it is the fact that overall, the other states all taken together, including Maryland, have had a 5.2% increase in growth. So that's kind of a good ballpark number to look at. But you can also note that some of the larger states here, particularly New York and California, Massachusetts in the top 10, they've had pretty substantial increases. Utah has had a very substantial increase after having a very low gubernatorial salary for some time. And when it comes to ranking, if we were to basically look at the fact that Maryland is number 9 now and compared to other states, if we were to check that against the previous cycle, Maryland's relative rank to other states has not changed much because in 2017, the ranking was number 10. So, and overall, I would say that as I go through all of these statewide comparisons, Maryland relative to the other states does not change much in terms of the actual ranking we'll be looking at. However, when it comes to salary percentage change in the increase, Maryland certainly is under many of the other states that we're going to be looking at, particularly those states that are a little more similar in Maryland in terms of the economy and population. So moving on to exhibit number 7, this is the same comparison of governor's salaries, except now we're ranking it by state general revenues. So in this one, we're looking at Maryland. Maryland's number 15. It occupies the exact identical space it did in 2017. It was also number 15 then. And again, we see the change, 2.86% to be exact. And again, like I had said before, when compared to all of the other states, those other states have seen a over 5% increase in salary overall and in average. We can also look at exhibit number 8. This shows governor's salaries ranked by population. So Maryland is a little bit lower, more towards the middle, obviously, because it's a smaller state with just over 6 million people. Again, the percentage change numbers that I mentioned before, those aren't going to change. They're the same because we're talking about the salary change from 2017 to 2021. But that's where Maryland is number 19. And again, it occupied the same position relative to other states back in 2017. Exhibit number 9, again, identical exhibit, except this time we're looking at per capita income. Maryland is definitely a standout here for such a small state. We are at number 7 in per capita income in the country. I would note that this does not include Washington, D.C., which would have occupied the number 1 category, but D.C. is not technically a state. So you can see some of the standouts here: Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, et cetera. And when we look at overall, when we look at a lot of the salary changes here, again, it's not a huge change in terms of Maryland's rank versus the other states compared to the last cycle. Now, exhibits 10 through 14, this is a brief discussion of the constitutional officers other than the governor and lieutenant governor. So now we're basically going to be talking about the lieutenant governor, the comptroller, the treasurer, the attorney general, and the secretary of state. So Maryland right now, in terms of lieutenant governor salaries, is at number 7 in the country out of 50 at 149,500. If we were to move on down a little bit, again, in terms of the ranking with the other states, again, there has really not been much relative rank change for Maryland. When we talk about the lieutenant governor salary, it's 7 now, it was number 7 back in 2017. So the suggestion here is that when you look at the data over the years, the states tend to move in lockstep more or less. So their relative rank does not change much. Exhibit number 11, this is for the comptroller. Again, of course, that's 149,500. This ranking did not change much. Maryland is number 16 now. It was number 15 back in 2017. And I would also note, there are a variety of footnotes at the bottom, and at some of these charts, you'll see footnotes. You can check your own documents when you have the time, because all this means is that some states don't necessarily have a comptroller position. Some states, for example, may not have a lieutenant governor, but they have the president of the Senate who takes over those duties. So in these situations, like in this particular page right here, we have all of these different situations accounted for in the footnotes.
And Ken,
Yes.
I think it is also important on that point too, that even if states have a position of the same name, it doesn't mean that they do the same thing. There's a lot of variability amongst states. So do, look at these with a little bit of a grain of salt in terms of there may be explanations for some things that may look like an outlier, but just wanted you to be aware of that.
Then moving back to, moving forward to exhibit number 12, this is the treasurer. Maryland is kind of in that top 3rd cohort, like it tends to be with the rest of these salaries. Right now, Maryland is at number 12, and during the last cycle, relative to other states, again, it was number 9. So treasurer's salary was a little bit better relative to the other states during the previous cycle. And then we move on to exhibit number 13. This is for the attorney general. Again, Maryland is in that top 3rd of states, but again, not much change here. In the salary level, no change, and also in comparison to other states, no change either compared to the last cycle. Maryland was 15 last time, it's 16 now, so not much change. And then the last constitutional officer position is Secretary of State. Maryland is more towards a little bit closer to the middle of the pack here at 105,500. And again, compared to the last time, the rank here is 27. Compared to 2017, it was 28. So again, these do tend to move in lockstep. But this is just another way to give you a little bit of additional insight into what's going on with the constitutional officer salaries. So that's the end of the exhibits. I'm going to zoom back up and we're going to take a look at some of the items that are still on the table in terms of the business. One item that I could mention is we do have a comparison here of inflation rates. So if the commissioners are interested, I can quickly go through what we're talking about and what we're seeing in terms of CPI. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So bear with me now. I'm going to need to switch my screen out a little bit. Okay, so here we have a spreadsheet of the United States Consumer Price Index, CPI, also a good measure of inflation by Moody's and IHS. So what we're looking at here is when you look at the left-hand side, we have the years from 2009 all the way up to 2029. And then when we look at the columns here on the right-hand side of both of these charts, this is essentially inflation from 2018 onward, but it's a cumulative measure. So just really quickly, what this would look like for us in terms of real world numbers in 2021, cumulative inflation tends to be at about 7.4%. So if we're looking at that and we're thinking, okay, this is a good measure of the cost of living, we can zoom over here to the state employee salaries. Cumulatively, and this is related to the chart that I'd spoke about earlier, where state employees have received a raise a few years in a row. Cumulatively, state employees in the state of Maryland since 2018, 2019 have seen an 8.5% increase in their salary. That does compare favorably to the inflation numbers, which are at 7.4%. So where does that leave us in terms of what's happening now in terms of the governor? Well, the governor, if you look at these, the way this is color coded, in 2018, the governor had a salary that went up to $180,000. That's where it remains today. However, if we were to take these current numbers, and again, this is Moody's and IHS, they are the best in the business, but they're subject to change if and when the economy changes. Right now, generally the consensus is that interest rates are tightening a little bit. We're seeing these rates go up. So that if the governor's salary was pegged to inflation, and this does not happen in reality, but if it did, we would see the governor's salary go up to over $220,000 by the time the next governor enters office, which would be in 2023. So just another point for the commission to take into account. So again, if you look at the lower corner here, these points in bold I put here as kind of the takeaways that we have from this. Again, just to recap, state employee salaries compared favorably with inflation from 2019 to 2022, 8.5% to 7.4%. When we looked at a lot of the state comparisons there, we were talking about, generally speaking, around a 5 to 6% increase in governor salaries, more or less across the board on average across the country. So we're seeing increases there generally. And then when it talks about, when we're talking about the Maryland governor's salary again versus those numbers, whether it's 7.4% or 8.5% or the 5.6% we saw in all states, our state has not kept pace with inflation or with those other metrics. Again, as I said, rates are expected to continue to rise. So again, this is just another example, a little bit of food for thought in terms of inflation and how we're seeing the increases in our employee salaries, but not at this particular level in terms of the constitutional officers, at least not yet. So I'm going to take this down and we'll go back to the main Zoom. So in terms of organizational items, again, we did speak about what the commission may or may not want to do with these other constitutional officer positions. But again, the main charge of the commission, as we spoke about earlier, is to simply decide on what to do with the governor's compensation and the lieutenant governor's compensation. So those are the two main pieces to kind of talk about. And at this time, I would turn it over to our newly minted chairman, Chair Plaxton. And, again, this is collegial, as Steve said. The way this committee is run is very collegial. So, if there's any discussion or any questions about any of these issues, we can certainly address any of those as needed.
I just wondered before we got away from the salary increases. I looked up the Maryland average salary, the average salary of Marylanders, and it was about $68,000. And I wondered, does anyone have any data about how much ordinary Maryland citizens' salaries have gone up over the period that we're talking about from 2018 to 2021?
Yeah, we can definitely look into that because I'll be able to pull the numbers from 2017 per capita and get back to you on that.
We can certainly get, DLS does track personal income, which is kind of a proxy. It does include more salary and wages, but that is a good measure. And we can certainly bring that, to the next meeting.
There's a chart, and maybe I'm wrong. Wasn't one of the exhibits also ranked Maryland by per capita income?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. It looks like Exhibit 9. And it shows a 2.86% change apparently from 2017.
That's the governor's change, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not the per capita change.
It's not the per capita change. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's the ranking of the states by per capita, and we're the 7th, if you want to call it richest, if that's how you rate people, but it's the 7th highest per average income in the country.
Which is fairly consistent with what Eleanor just said.
Yeah, exactly.
68,000.
So yeah, and like Steve said, we can definitely pull that specific information for 2017 so you can make that comparison.
So Ken, since you turned it over to me, I'll ask the rest of this committee if they have questions for you or Steve about any of the data or anything else anyone would like to see before we set our agenda or have discussions. I know Eleanor had that good question, but I don't know if anyone else has data they'd like to see staff gather, because I know from the last 2 times we did it, whatever we asked you to do, you found it for us.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question for Ken, going back to his previous slide on inflation. So Ken, if we, hypothetically, if we were to adjust the salary to keep pace with inflation or the anticipated pace of inflation, it looked like you had 12.4% as where inflation would be by the time the next governor takes office. So
Correct.
if hypothetically, if we were going to keep pace, that's what the increase would be, a 12.4% increase.
Yeah, that's correct. So if you look at the blue line, 2023, a new governor would come in, and theoretically, if we had been keeping pace with inflation all of this time, cumulatively, it would be about 227,000. Now, there are no other states that, well, in general, as we all know, states and salaries and governments generally don't peg any specific salary to inflation, but it is a factor that they may keep in mind. I guess one thing that we could look at is if we said today, right now in 2021, what would the salary have been if we had been keeping pace? It would be 198,241. That would put Maryland in the top 3 currently of governor salaries, right behind, I believe, New York and possibly California. So again, it is more of an academic or theoretical exercise, but you are exactly right in that in 2023, it would be substantially higher if it was pegged to inflation all of this time. Yes, you're correct.
And let me just follow that up real quick. Do we know how much state employees' salaries will have increased by 2023? I mean, we don't have that information.
Yeah, I would say there would be no way to really measure that. That would be pending whatever action that the state would decide to take.
Right.
I mean, yeah, the governor includes various, salary increases, various groups of state employees in the budget. So until we get there, but what also on the inflation chart, just to make sure everybody understands, up to 2020 is actual CPI. So that is history. As of 2020, there's been a 3.1% increase since the 2018 last time the salaries increased. So that is a known. Everything below the line of 2021 and beyond are the forecasts. And as I'm sure you all are aware, inflation has been running at a greater and is projected to run at a higher rate than we've seen in the previous decade and a half. But the further out this goes, like any forecast, should be taken with a little bit of thought that it is a forecast and it's the best information we have at the moment. But there will no guarantees at this point. But we do know that there has been 3.1% actual inflation since 2018.
And in assessing the governor's salary as compared to the other constitutional officers, the governor gets certain benefits that no other state employee gets.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be hard for the governor to keep up with inflation. But we could discuss that in greater detail. I don't want to editorialize it, but there's quite a bit of benefits that the governor gets that other state employees don't get.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's important. I think that's a great point because, we want to have people who are qualified, truly qualified to hold the office. And then unfortunately, the voters sometimes don't make the best decision as we've seen, cross country. But we also have to be mindful of what the total compensation package is, because I've seen before particularly when times get tough, the governor can come under great criticism for all of the perks that he gets, or perhaps in the future, hopefully in the future she gets, versus the average citizen. So, if we talk about that, you think about it, they have
Right.
food, a vehicle, driver, all those types of things. And I just think we need to be sensitive to that. And so I think you make a good point.
I don't think we'll have any shortage of gubernatorial candidates for the salary. I think that's why you see cabinet members making more than the governor, or heads of agencies. And, the chart that's very illuminating is, the county execs and the people who really run government, have to be attracted, such as chief of police, superintendent of schools. Some of those jobs are very highly compensated. So I guess one of the first things.
Mr. Chairman, could I just throw in that one of the reasons that it looks sort of formulaic now and has for the last several times is because there was a time when the governor was not well paid and he got support from others outside, and that's what we did not want. So, you have to, it's true, people will contend for office, but you want to make sure that their focus and their interests are with the people of the state and not just contributors, supporters.
That is really important input. Yeah. Eleanor, it looked like you wanted to say something.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, could
Yeah.
I ask, for those of you who have been through this before and most specifically recently, what some of the conversation was and how the commission arrived at a zero increase for the last cycle?
Steve, can I take that one? And just like the other thing, if I'm wrong, feel free to jump in and correct me. 8 years ago, the governor was earning 150, and the numbers seemed below. The lieutenant governor and the other constitutional officers were at 125. And honestly, to everyone on the commission, it seemed low compared to most of the county executives, compared to the pool of people that you would see run for some of these officers would have to take a cut in pay. And the state was doing fine. And the recommendation was that it was time to catch up. And we caught up quite a bit. We went from 150 to 180 over a 4-year period. And you saw it was stepped in there. 4 years ago, the state budget was not as rosy. And it would have been unseemly to ask for raises. And the word from the governor, which we sometimes get a memo, we don't have a memo this time, was no raises. And the commission followed that lead, which is why it was 0 for 4 years. Did I get that right? Did I get that right?
Yes, I think that was.
But I think, Bruce, it's important to point out that, yes, I think you got that absolutely right. And that we could point to the fact that there had been significant increases in the past 2 years so that we weren't cutting the legs out from anyone. But I also think there's something to be said for at least coming close to inflation Because what happens otherwise is like with utility rates or anything else, you hold them down artificially, and then you get to a point where they have to go up, as opposed to just going up reasonably over time. And I'd hate to see us get back into that sort of game again.
No, it felt like 8 years ago we overcorrected.
Yeah, that's what
Or
I'm
no,
saying.
I wouldn't
There
say
was-
we overcorrected. We were overdue for a correction, not overcorrected. I think we were fair 8 years ago to bring Maryland up, because Maryland wasn't always eighth or ninth at that time. Maryland was more in the middle at 150. And we brought it up 8 years ago. And then 4 years ago, like the treasurer said, we could live with it with a pause or a freeze because we had moved Maryland in the upper tier, the 4 years prior. But what I'm hearing from this committee, and I'd like to before we get into specifics, either about all the constitutional officers or about the governor and lieutenant governor, which we're required to do, it sounds like there's a consensus that it's time for raises again.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm not entirely persuaded.
Okay.
I'm maybe persuaded to some, but I don't think that Maryland we don't need to jump up 4 or 5 places. That isn't our goal. Our goal is to obviously to attract people. I think Nancy's very right in saying we don't want people to have to, rely on contributions or whatever else. We want them to focus on what they're doing for the people of Maryland. I also am concerned. I don't want to see the governor I'm getting way out of step with what the people are earning. I mean, that's one of the governor's at least main concerns is how do we raise incomes and how do we make life better for all the people in Maryland and not just a few who live in privileged areas. So I'm not persuaded yet that we really need it, and I think others of you may well be, but I'm interested to hear everybody's arguments.
Well, could I just make clear what I was saying? I mean, I would consider an incremental increase, just like with state employees. I'm not suggesting we have to jump up in the tier or anything like that. I agree completely with Ellie. But I would point out also that we don't know what the other states are doing. And we're looking 4 or 5 years down the road.
Chart that struck out to me was the judiciary chart. Because Bruce, I remember when judges were making 114, 120, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. And I'm looking, our chief judge now makes 215, and our district court judges, which is the lowest court, are now making more than the governor. They make 184. And I'm not diminishing the importance of judges. And this goes back only the 4 years where they're about 6% raises. But if we go back longer, I imagine it's much bigger raises that we have. Almost everybody on these charts, whether it's judges or cabinet secretaries or county executives, are now making more than most of our constitutional officers, maybe with the exception of the governor in some cases. And again, I'm just pointing that out. I'm not advocating for large raises. I'm just pointing it out. And it may be the kind of thing where we look at the lower level constitutional officers first. And if we decide they need raises and we make that recommendation to the legislature, that we find that we will have to bump up the governor and lieutenant governor as well. And it doesn't have to be the same percentage wise. We certainly don't have to compete with New York and California. I understand that.
No, so my thinking actually is very much in line with yours, Mr. Chair. I look at the lower offices, constitutional officers, and to me, they appear to have the greatest need for increase in compensation. But if we do that, then I think we would be compelled to make some adjustment for the governor and lieutenant governor. And I was sitting there looking at, as you said, the judiciary salaries and compensation. And I noted as well that the current budget secretary is making $196,000. So it just seems to me that we need to move the governor up somewhat, not over the moon and not at the same level as the lower officers. But once we do that, of course, we'll have to make an adjustment, I would think, for the lieutenant governor as well.
So Steve, just to go back to the point Bruce made earlier, are we able to get a list of other remunerations that the governor receives other than salary?
I think it's in the material, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, it is.
It's in kind of small print somewhere in this material. I saw it earlier.
Yeah, and it's certainly in the previous report we talk about,
Okay.
and that may be where, and I do have the previous report. Let me see if I can find the.
Did you circulate the previous report?
I certainly can. It's yes. I'll do that.
I'm kind of nerdy. I actually read it today.
It's on the website.
Yeah. And I think you were able to click to it.
Yep.
Housing,
Mm-hmm.
Transportation.
transportation, state
Security.
employee healthcare. It's,
A defined benefit plan, which most people in the state, are not getting these days. I mean, the state pension is worth
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
equal amount to anyone who gets it. And those of us who do are, grateful.
pretty good healthcare
Mhm.
plan. I don't know if they can belong to supplemental retirement also, the DC plan. There are good benefits.
Mr. Chairman, I just found the personal income. If you'd like, I can share that now with the group.
Sure. Thank you.
Let me.
I told you, Jamar, you ask and you get it. How do Maryland, our average Marylanders compare to state employees? Oh, here we go.
Okay, so this is the Maryland personal income. Again, up to 2020 is the actual change in personal income. So there's been, 3.5% in 2020, a big jump. A lot of that was probably related to stimulus checks. Also the, the stock market being up. So one thing that this data does not show, obviously personal income is not, increases are not realized across the spectrum. So you have to take that into account. There are, high earners that have gotten things that low earners have not during this pandemic. So it's been, various rates for various populations. Everything below the line is the projection, and personal income again in 2021 is expected to continue with a good increase. 22 is down, likely because things are returning a bit more to normal. Some of that one-time income disappears, but it is growing off a bigger base. So even though it's a small increase, it's still an increase. And then we go back to fairly good projections for personal income changes in the future.
And this, if you're done with that, Steve, I was going to follow up with per capita income.
Yes, how do I?
17.
Let me see. Stop sharing my screen. There it is.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just to follow up, this dovetails nicely with Steve's excellent data. This is just the per capita income from 2017. So this is a little bit pertinent to Commissioner Carey's question. So when we look at the per capita income of 58,000 the last cycle, The current number is 64,541. So there's been an 11.1% increase in terms of per capita income in the state. So I don't know what that would look like in terms of comparison to other states, but at least within the state of Maryland, people have seen, when we look at per capita income, they've seen an 11% increase over this time period, over the 4 years.
Your chart, it looks like it says 13.3. Are you looking at different numbers?
Well, 13.3% is the increase
Oh,
of
from
the governor's
2013 to
salary from
2017. I got you.
2014 to
I'm
2017.
sorry. I'm
Correct.
sorry. Yeah. Okay. So using this, the average Marylander has gotten 11%. The
Correct.
state employees have gotten 8.5% over the first 3 years and will probably get a raise this year and next year. And if we use just inflation, it's 12.4%. So somewhere between 11 and 12 and 13% is what we've seen in other Marylanders, whether they be a state employee, whether it's been keyed to inflation, or whether it's your average Marylander.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay.
So, if you wanted to broaden the range out a little bit, as I said before, if we look at all of the states together, we're talking about 5.6%, so roughly about 6%. And then, like you said, that range would go up to about maybe 12, 13% overall, when we're looking at the overall scope of inflation in general, as in terms of what it's predicted to be.
Okay.
In terms of what it's predicted to be over the next 5 years?
Well, if we go back to the
Right.
inflation chart, so for the next, I guess the best way to explain this, for the next fiscal year of 2023, we're looking at 12%, which is the cumulative increase from 2018.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were projecting
Yeah.
through
Nobody,
the term.
I don't think anybody on this committee
No.
wants to jump the governor to the top of the class and get to 217 or 227 or anything like that. And I don't want to speak for anyone else, but that's what I'm hearing, the temperature of the committee.
Yeah, and again, I will jump over to, let's look at the overall salaries to kind of give you an idea. So here's where the salaries are currently. New York is number one with 225.
And just to be clear, because we put together that governor's salary inflated by CPI, that was not an intention to steer the committee in any direction. It was simply to say, if it were pegged to inflation, that's what you'd be seeing. So
Well, that's what you would have seen.
you would have seen, exactly. And so it's informational, not directional, is what I wanted to make sure everybody understood.
I have a question. Do you, either of you, Steve or Ken, know what these other states are doing for the, I mean, we're looking out 5 years now. We're not talking about this year, really.
The most recent data that we use to put these rankings together is from the Book of the States, which the Council of State Governments puts out every year. So, and that's always a look back. But the fact that the last cycle where there were increases in stepped, annual increases in salary, and the fact that most of the Maryland positions kind of maintain their rank suggests that other states are doing exactly what Maryland is doing, and they, either periodically or annually do some increase for their positions. So we don't know what others are doing now.
Would it be very difficult just to call some of these states and find out what they're doing?
Well, I'm not sure who you'd call, because if somebody tried to do that and called Maryland, I'm not sure who. And if they called us as staff, we would certainly say, well, we don't know. If they talk to you commission members, I'm not sure what you would say.
But what I'm hearing, because whatever salary we decide on doesn't go into effect till 2023 and stays in effect till 2026, there won't be another raise till 2027, that even a 5 or 10% raise, which might move us from 7 to 5, doesn't mean we stay there, because any of these other states presumably will raise salaries over the next 5 years. Okay.
Correct. And
I think so.
Yeah, that
And
is a good pertinent point from the chair, because, when we do look at the scope of changes, we do have to remember that this is going to be a change that emanates throughout the cycle, which is a 4-year cycle. So it's not just going to be 2023. The commission has the latitude to make changes that are going to carry forward for the next 4 years. So that is a point to take into consideration.
And for what it's worth, I just pulled up off of Google that the congressional salaries are now $174,000 for members of Congress.
And they don't do any work.
Touchy, touchy.
Well, I think it would be interesting to see what's I thought we used to be able to get from NGA, NCSL, whomever, some understanding of what other states, maybe that none of them have processes like this, but I think that they do. Because what concerns me is if we hold still for essentially 10 years, 9 years in a row, you don't want to back into a problem. But I'm not for, I think if everyone stays the way they are, if we continue to be where we are compared to our neighboring states and compared to our increase in personal income, et cetera, I think that's fine. I have no desire to lead this pack, but it's a long time not to move anything. Which is why I think looking at state employees and things like COLAs and trying to project forward in a conservative way makes some sense. But this being a political year, people may not want to increase anything.
And I would note that, just kind of an additional piece of information when we talk about the CPI, if when we look at our state employees, they've received that 8.5%. So in order for them to keep pace with inflation, we're going to need to see state employees get another roughly 4% increase over the next year or two to be able to keep pace. Now, I'm not making any comment on whether that's going to happen or whether it should happen or not, but just to give a little bit more detail about the CPI, maybe bring it down to earth a little bit in terms of CPI. And I would note one thing that me and Steve could do is we can certainly send a wrap-up email to everyone afterwards, kind of restating some of these points in terms of the range that everybody's been looking at and been asking about. But I have not been able to get information in terms of, from the Council of State Governments, the Book of the States, and other states. They are still in the process of gathering the information for their next edition of the books. So usually this is going to be something that will be at the very tail end of the year. And like Steve had said before, in terms of other states giving specific information about what they may or may not do legislatively in terms of salaries, that kind of information is difficult to get. So I'll turn it back over to the chair.
I think what I heard you just say, Ken, is some of these numbers may not even be accurate. These were numbers from like the beginning of the year. Is that what I understood when you said the Book of States gets updated at the end of each year?
Yeah, more or less. So you could look at this and say this may be a year old, but that's why we compared it for 4 years ago. The cycle goes every 4 years.
But in any
And it's the most accurate.
is a
I wasn't suggesting you gave us old data. I was just trying to clarify that yeah, I mean, any of these states could have voted in raises in the last year or so or have raises that are coming up next year. Yeah. Because the way we do it, we have to do it almost 2 years ahead of time because it has to go through our legislative session before the new governor takes before there's an election. I'm gonna go back to the agenda.
Right.
What else would anyone on this committee want in terms of data, and how would you like to see us take this from top to bottom, or as Bruce suggested, maybe look at the, I don't like the term lower constitutional officers.
Yeah, I
Neither
understand.
do I.
Yeah. Do we want to look at our attorney general, our comptroller, and our treasurer first, and then see what that does to our discussion on the governor, or do we want to start at the top? Does anyone have an opinion on that?
Am I right in recollecting that we did, I may be totally wrong, governor and lieutenant governor, and just pegged the others where the lieutenant governor was?
Yes, because they were already making the same.
Yeah, as instead of going through huge reams of stuff for.
That is exactly what we did. We did the governor, then the lieutenant governor. And because the lieutenant governor made the same as the attorney general and the treasurer, I don't remember a lot of discussion about attorney general and treasurer. And then we just gave the secretary of state a similar percentage raise.
Yeah,
And of course, we don't have to do it in steps. We could just pick a number for the whole 4 years.
Well, to answer
Right.
I'd favor focusing initially on the AG, the comptroller, and the treasurer, and
the LG, assuming that the lieutenant governor gets the same pay, right?
I would guess.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to do that. That's the way it's been historically. Right? Yeah.
I think
Right now, the lieutenant governor earns the same as the attorney general, the
Yeah.
comptroller, and the treasurer.
and there clearly is not a dearth of people running for anything, as far as I can tell.
There are 13 people running for governor.
Yeah,
Well, we just need to have compensation so that competent people run. The voters can then go vote in someone who doesn't meet that standard.
I really do think the way it's been working seems to have worked and made sense. You don't hear the complaints we used to, even about the attorney general, that he could make so much, or she could make so much more in the private sector. It's true, everyone knows that, but I mean, that's the one to me that's the most critical, actually, because you've got the comparison sort of in your face. Comptroller and treasurer are vaguer.
But you know, the other thing I'll point out, and you know, Nancy, you said just jokingly for a minute, no, we won't see you again. But my gosh, with what elected officials have to put up with today, there's just the guff factor, which is so much greater than it was back when I was in the legislature. Really, you know, I empathize with anybody who holds office today, and particularly at the higher levels, because there's just so much scrutiny, and it's so difficult to really reach consensus and work through problems. And I think
that's true. Although thank God, that's still less true in Maryland than it is in down the road in Washington. But on the other hand, I don't know that you really want to just entice them with bigger salaries to put up with a lot of, you know.
Well, but I mean, the you know, there's complete loss of privacy now, and I think that needs to be taken in. I'm not saying by any stretch go to what they could command in the private sector. I mean, frankly, I've often thought a person who was state treasurer, who had all of your accomplishments, could have, after a couple of years, used all those contacts and gone into work in the private sector and commanded a heck of a lot more money. For us, fortunately, you didn't do that, but it could be done.
Yeah, it could. I mean, there's no question that I can't think of anyone in these offices who couldn't go to the private sector and make more money. But on the other hand, that's not the only reason they're doing it. And there are a large number of people. Again, I mean, I think you can see it with the Attorney General, but clearly, people want to be Attorney General. God bless them. Good people. Ms. Carey here.
The Attorney General is an easy one to look at because you compare it to salaries of senior partners in big firms.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the Attorney General is running the biggest, most important law firm in the state, but
not for the money really, but you do want them to feel comfortable that they can support a family, that they can devote 24 hours a day to their job, which they do. I mean, that they can do it. Again, I mean, we started this with the late Governor Mandel, who was earning $25,000 a year,
Right.
couldn't support a family doing that. And you saw what happened. That's what we don't want, I think. But I don't think that's the situation now, even with the Attorney General's salary being so much less than major firms. It's my opinion.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry, yes.
is it appropriate today to actually make a proposal, or is it best that we not? What I was thinking was that you could actually have it pending. You could, for the next meeting, or we could think about this and then make a motion next time.
We can certainly do that. Steve, is there anything on the second meeting agenda other than a call to action where we make our final recommendation?
Everything from this point on is directed by the commission. So whatever your desires are for future meetings, there is no requirement that you hold more than one meeting.
Well,
Do we get input from anyone else?
I was just going to say, let's hear from other.
I think staff would get us input from whoever they have availability from, or anybody on this call could certainly reach it. Is it appropriate to reach out to anyone already holding office?
No, Bruce, what I meant.
Or were we supposed to, what the treasurer said, get input from others. Who did you mean?
I actually was thinking of the public, but
Oh, okay.
I'm
sorry.
But also, it would be interesting to know what the people who opposed who nominated the members of this committee think, if anything.
Bruce, all I meant was, I just wanted to hear if the other members of the committee.
Yeah, that's what I had.
Comfortable entertaining a proposal. I mean, I have a proposal in mind as I look at this that I would put out and have debated, but I don't want to do that if folks would prefer to have another meeting and be able to review everything in the meantime.
I think Ellie had some concerns when we started the discussion about raises in general, right?
Well, I mean, I'm more in Nancy's position. I'm not opposed to raises in general. I'm opposed to, I think, a significant raise that would lift us way up in the standings, because I don't think we should get a raise for that purpose. And Maryland is not a very large state. And if we're talking about putting ourselves up, in the New York category, because I just don't think that's appropriate. I also think that I very much oppose the current look at government, which has been going on for a long time, and denigrating what people do. I think that's very bad. On the other hand, I'm concerned about having it look that somebody in government is making a great deal of money, and I don't think they truly are for what they do. But I've got two concerns. They're competing concerns. And I'm not opposed to a raise in general, but would like to see us have a rationale as certainly the last group did on keeping it. I think we need to look at the economy. We need to look across the board as to where other states are, It would be good to get some more information about, to have some idea as to what the trend is. So,
Well, it's,
I have
go
two.
ahead, Chuck.
Oh, sorry, Mr.
No,
Chair.
no, go
I have two sort of competing points of view. One is that on its face, the governor has not received an increase in many years. It feels like, and so that seems on its face to be not equitable. That said, Maryland is not the ninth largest state in the country, and we're ninth in gubernatorial salary. And I'm not sure what a few of these other states that are close to us that are much other than Vermont, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Illinois, larger than Maryland, and I'm not sure what they will have done or what they will do. Oh, and I don't know whether we can find that out, Steve or Ken, but it would give me pause, I think, just as Ellie just said, to leapfrog, very potentially leapfrog over a few larger states to get to a fourth or fifth place, where the Maryland governor's salary is up much higher than it is now. I don't know whether that matters, but it's all relative, right? So as I said, my points of view are competing.
So this is very interesting because I learned many years ago, we all probably heard this at some point, that you can do anything with data. If you look at the governor's salary, we're, I don't know, 7th, 8th, 9th in the country. But if you look at Secretary of State, we're 27th, and Attorney General 16th. And I guess if you even look at Attorney General, there are states, small states like Delaware, Utah, North Dakota, Hawaii, Alabama. Wyoming's the smallest state in the country, and Wyoming's 4th. That are well ahead of Maryland. So it's hard to tell what drives salaries in these states, whether it's income or population or what, because the charts differ and it's not the same states at the top. Tennessee pays their attorney general $193,000, which I think is way more than they pay their governor. So it's we could print these charts out and hold them side by side, and we'd all come up with different conclusions. It's a really fascinating thing. Someone mentioned Vermont as as paying more, or was near us. Chuck, did you just mention Vermont?
I did. Vermont is pays their governor right now, I guess, more than we do.
That's amazing because Vermont's the second smallest state in the country.
Right. Right.
I think rather than size, if you look at things like income, wealth, I mean, you look at our state as a whole, it makes more sense, but it leaves us in just about the same place, I think. So it's not just how big we are, but even for a wealthy state, we pay pretty well. And for the one thing I would look at is the state employees personally, because we go through all sorts of screens before deciding what sort of raises they can get. And it seems to me, if you have the same sort of set of screens, you come up with something of an average, I don't know what it is, 2.5% a year or something, 2% a year, something like that.
We could go into an even deeper dive and look at the tax rates of these states, and Maryland's highly taxed. And you could also look at cost of living, where we're near the top.
Right.
And maybe what you just have to do is figure out what feels right. I don't know.
I think we faced it a few commissions ago. There were real problems. I don't think there's a real problem now, but I just think it's not a great idea to freeze things for 8 or 9 years in a row.
I would agree with that.
Bruce, do you want to put your proposal on the table? It might be a starting point, and then we'll see. And I'm not suggesting we need to get this done in one meeting, but maybe it'll give us all something to think about.
Well, as most things I did in public life, it's a very simplistic view. It's the only thing I can hold on to. I note that the current congressional salary is $174,000. And I think that would be appropriate for the Attorney General, the Comptroller, and the Treasurer. I realize that's a significant increase, but I also think we have to consider that a lot of the people who hold office come from the metropolitan areas, and the expense is very significant. So to me, $174,000, given the expense that they face, but also the responsibilities that they have, is appropriate. We talked about the Attorney General runs the largest firm in the state, but let's face it, the Comptroller and the Treasurer have immense power in this state by virtue of the Board of Public Works, immense responsibility. And as I said before, we're lucky that she didn't do it, but somebody could have easily picked up Nancy Kopp and she could have made far more. And I'm sure the same would be said for the Comptroller. So that's my proposal.
Steve just put in the chat to me that the public, to answer, I think, the treasurer's question, public comment was invited. Nobody signed up. The public.
And there will be, I assume they'll be hearing when the session.
Well, there has to be a resolution and a bill.
Yeah.
So, yeah, people could come down and say,
Yeah.
we all make too much money, and whoever wants to sign up, whether they're virtual this year or in person, yeah, the public can come down and testify. And this is just a recommendation. The legislature doesn't have to adopt our recommendation, though.
No, but we want them to.
We do want them to. We do. We'd be very hurt if they didn't. We put all this effort into it.
Bruce, does your recommendation account for any second, third, fourth year step up? Or
I
would
had
that just be?
Jamar, and I'd like input on that. I think Nancy raised a great point. I don't want to go crazy on the years, but if you don't do anything, then you build in a problem.
Right.
So I guess, my proposal was just start for the first year in at 174,000. And then if people want to talk about some type of step, I'd be open to that.
Could we find out, Steve or Mr. Chairman, what the Bureau of Revenue estimates, what estimates they're projecting going forward for increases, salary increases, personal salary increases? They've got those. I mean, it's all projection, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I shared the spreadsheet that showed personal income, and that had projections out to 2027. Is that?
And where did those come from?
Those were the BRE numbers.
They were the BRE numbers. Well, then.
Yes.
So what are the BRE numbers? I don't have it in front of me. And again, I don't have my laptop. Those are for the years we're covering year by year.
It goes, yes, as you can see, 1 second. So it goes back to 2009, the data. 2020 is the last actual, and then they project out for 2027, which is beyond the scope of this commission. This commission will make recommendations, basically through 2026. So,
So if we took oh no, that's a lot. It's going up a lot, the personal income. Projections.
Yeah, these are the BREs September that just came out. So that are the current projections.
Whatever number we recommend is not going to keep up with inflation or BRE or actual state employees. It's more a matter of perception, I think. All of this is a matter of perception.
Well, what Bruce is suggesting, going from basically 150 to 175 is.
Nancy, were you saying that, were you questioning that? or what?
Well, I was thinking which is not what Bruce was saying, if you got to 175 at the end of the term
Right, no,
by steps.
I mean, that's a 16, almost 17% raise, if I'm correct. That seems like a lot. That seems like a lot in one jump.
Right.
And then what does that mean, Bruce, for the governor?
Well, frankly, not that much. That's this is my thinking. My thought was bump the governor up to either $195,000 or $200,000 because of all the other benefits that he has. I mean, which are quite large. And so when people talk about that compensation package, they don't factor in those things typically, but I think it's quite different.
Yeah, I mean, I think transportation and housing, I just looked it up, and this is for average citizens, is about $20,000 a year in expenses.
Yeah, I think the only one that makes headlines is the governor's salary. Otherwise, we'd be seeing headlines about all the cabinet members.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, paying the attorney general 174 doesn't make headlines, or the treasurer when the budget cabinet member head of budget is making 196. It's the governor's salary that attracts the headlines, right? Right?
I think so. And the other, look, I don't feel strongly about this, but the other point I would make is, yes, it's a big bump, but if you look at their responsibilities versus what we pay other people, their responsibilities are still greater versus people who are compensated at the same level. So, we look at people who hold positions in the cabinet and also the judiciary. Certainly, the attorney general, the comptroller, and the treasurer, in my opinion, need to be at a level that is on par with people in the judiciary and people who are not the top paid in a cabinet, but at the higher levels. That's what I was thinking.
So if I may, I agree with you, Bruce. I think that the biggest disparity falls between the attorney general, comptroller, and treasurer. And I think addressing that and finding a number that works, and I like the 174 number. I don't know that I am as high as you on the governor because of all the perks that Jamar just pointed out, the 20,000. If you look at that on top of 180, that's already 200 grand. I'm a little bit less than that. But I also want to say to both Steve and Ken, I really appreciate these numbers. I'm a girl who likes paper. And so I have really pored over these over the last few days and taken notes as to what everyone says. And in my professional capacity, when I have as a COO and CFO of an international company, it is, hard to when you look at talent and want to base talent on and salary on where they live and what their responsibilities are. But I think employees that you're about to hire appreciate that. And I think, while we cannot always agree that, people should make less money to serve in office, although there is some sense of that, I think we have to make certain that where we can compensate them, that we do so well so that we have talented people who feel like they're valued in the jobs they have.
I think we are doing that for the positions that don't get elected. If you look at the appointed positions, and that takes the ego out and all the other factors of that goes into politics. So that was well said, Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, I can get behind your proposal at 174 and the rationale that you used. I would suggest that we do one of two things: either make it 174 for the entire cycle, or step up to 174 through the years. I don't have a strong point of view either way. I understand that getting there right away is a pretty big jump, but they are that group of folks is clearly underpaid. So I don't see a giant problem with that, with that step, but whatever everybody wants to do.
Yes, sir. No, yes, sir. I hear you. I mean, so I'm going to make a proposal and we can vote on it. And if it doesn't pass, we can try something else. I'll just move that the salaries be increased for the Attorney General, the Comptroller, and the Treasurer to $174,000 at the start of the next term, and to stay then without adjustment for the 4-year term.
So
I'll
it's been a
second that.
motion. I've been parliamentarian of a lot of organizations, so I know this part. There's a motion made, so it would need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, so we're going to open that for discussion, and the motion is limited to the 3 officers we discussed, not the governor or the Secretary of State at this point. So the idea is to find a salary for the 3. Now we won't call them the lower constitutional officers, the middle constitutional officers, because the Secretary of State is not on this call. We can just say the middle officers, and we can.
Any reason we left the lieutenant governor out of that, Bruce? Or
Oh, exactly, Chuck. I forgot, and I would say that the lieutenant governor. I was going to have the lieutenant governor at the same level, and again, my thinking that the governor has to assume considerable responsibilities or be ready to assume considerable responsibility, and yet the lieutenant governor does not have any of the compensation, non-monetary compensation that the governor does. I know. I saw you laugh, Madam Treasurer, for times, right? But
I'm trying to keep track. I hope staff is doing a better job. I mean, Chuck, was it you who seconded Bruce's motion?
Yeah, I'll second the amended motion.
thank you.
All right.
Could I just say, I do have some concern about voting to go from 150 to 175 overnight,
174.
174.
Thanks, Jamar, for paying attention.
Thanks, Jamar. Yeah.
And also during an election year. That's a big jump. And the legislature might not be willing to go along this year.
Yeah.
I mean, is there?
They may be looking for their own raise.
Right.
This might give them cover to give themselves a raise.
Is there thought to the possibility of having it in increments?
That Bruce, you made the motion, or do we want to discuss it before Bruce addresses it? Are there other people like to go to like something in the 160s and then feather it in over 3 years or something like that, Ellie? Is that more palatable?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's under 150 right now.
149.5, yeah.
1 to 160 or something.
I mean, I think our recommendation that got the easiest acceptance and understanding was 2013. It was a good year, but this is a good year too.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like a plan, just as we have for state employees, to go up in increments. And then we froze it. And I would suggest going back to the plan of not basing it on the exact numbers of projected inflation, because you don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
But to make it look like stepped in increases is probably the easiest to accept, I would think. Because then somebody said they're getting 170. Oh, no, they're not. They're getting 160. Oh, well, that's okay. You've been there.
So
You were the majority leader.
So I pulled up
Yes, and the wisdom of the voters caught up with me.
So I just for historical accuracy, the 2010 report or the 2020, I guess 2010 report also did steps of approximately 5,000. Well, they did nothing. The first and second year was frozen. Then in years 3 and 4, there were small steps.
That was because 2010 was a bad year. financially.
Okay,
So it made it look prudent.
okay. Yeah, they were very small steps, but they got to where I guess they wanted to be. So there is a history of going in steps. I'm okay doing it either way. But whatever the will of this committee is. Right now, there's a motion to go to 174. And it sounds like, and I hate summarizing all of you, but it sounds like everyone is okay getting to 174. It's just how we get there. And if someone is not okay, then you should correct me.
One other consideration is where it puts us with respect to the governor. Does it lock us in at this point if we're going to do this motion this time? Is it lock us into making a significant jump for the governor?
Would you feel better addressing it as a total, coming to a consensus on the governor and secretary of state and making one motion for the 6 offices?
I think I would.
Okay, so Bruce's suggestion, and I think Chuck's suggestion, were that just because we're giving a $25,000 raise to the middle constitutional officers doesn't mean that the governor
Has to get one.
needs to go all the way up because of the governor's other benefits, that we could take the governor to 195 or something, which would be like a 8% raise, while the other officers are getting like a 15 or 16% raise over 4 years. And I don't think we'd make headlines raising the governor from 180 to 195 or something like that.
I think that makes sense, Bruce, or
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm okay.
Flaxen, you're so slick.
Steve, can you tell us where that puts us in the rankings on governor salaries?
Yeah, it would be 5 today. Or as of 2021, Maryland would be number 5.
Yeah, and again, that's assuming everything else, all the other states,
Right.
which we know by history will not be the case. And just for some context, the average annual increase from going from 149.5 to 174 would be about 5.2% per year.
Mhm.
In other words, when we are calling it a 16% raise, it's over a 4-year period, or it's going out 5 or 6 years.
5
from now.
years.
Yeah.
From now, but yes, but it would be, it would take 1 year, whatever increase you started off, but if you end up over 4 years from the current level, then it's a 5%, yes. And if you take it from today's, it's an even smaller percent because that's over a longer period. But obviously, your increases can only take place in the 4 years of the next term.
Which is still lower than I think we started the conversation with. The other states had done an aggregate of about a 6% raise over the years. I think when Ken made his presentation.
But this would be, that's 5% annually to get between that. So that's, the 3 years at 5.2.
The only other point I would make, getting back to the judiciary, is 2022, all circuit court judges will be paid $174,433. And I just conceptually have a hard time saying that the attorney general, the comptroller, and the treasurer should be paid less. I think circuit court judges are immensely important in this state, but I certainly wouldn't say that their responsibilities would exceed these constitutional officers.
I agree, Bruce.
I agree. I don't think it's the political football that we think it is, except, I remember when Governor O'Malley got a new vehicle, someone wrote a letter to the editor of the Sun that he shouldn't have gotten leather seats because it could have saved the state $1,200. I mean, some people are going to pay attention, but most of the state are not going to pay attention. You're not sure, Ellie?
I'm not sure in election year. I'm not sure of that, but people pay attention, to so many things these days.
They should pay attention to other lines in the budget.
Right.
I sense there's a consensus here and everybody has many different feelings going in different ways. I agree with Bruce. I mean, the treasurer, the comptroller, the attorney general should be paid more. They should be paid, theoretically, they should be paid more at least than, if not their chief assistants, the deputies to the chief assistants. But that's just not,
You may have frozen.
just as well.
Does anybody know what a deputy AG makes? I know the assistant AGs make about 120.
Oh, she's got him.
I can pull that up really quick.
She's worth every penny.
So you should see the information here.
Oh, deputy.
Deputy
Deputy
AG is
AG
at
makes-
167.
And the AG and his or her boss is making 149.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, and the deputy, so the deputy treasurer, your deputy is making 167, Madam Treasurer, right?
Yes, and it wasn't easy to get that for her either.
And deputy comptroller, which no one's ever heard of, or I don't know if anyone on this call could name, is making 193, while the comptroller is making almost $50,000.
I can tell you who it is, and she's the person who does a hell of a lot more work than some other people.
I didn't mean it disparaging. I just meant that there's a lot of people in this state getting
Right,
state salaries that nobody in the state cares about. And we're talking about salaries less than all of these people. The deputies are really interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting system when you all hire
Yeah.
people that make more money than you.
I'm not sure she's actually now that I look at it, the deputy who's earning that.
Okay.
I don't know, there've been changes. in
I
that.
did not mean to disparage anyone. I
No.
don't know who it is. I just meant that I can't name him or her.
Um,
And I'm
But
not
I do
surprised
think
that you can.
yeah, well, the
course.
present one is just down the hall from us. It could be that was her predecessor, Mr. Foxwell.
Right.
But anyhow, I do think that we should be looking at the package, at the impact. I mean, I agree. You want to go in with something that's balanced but reflects your understanding that the governor has a greater suite of benefits than anyone else. I have traditionally not voted on the treasurer for obvious reasons, but of course,
This year it might be appropriate.
yes, exactly, for obvious reasons.
Do you, since some on the call wanted to discuss all 6 officers at the same time in one
Right,
proposal,
exactly.
do we
I-
want to
I'm
talk about
agreeing
the Secretary of State, which our Secretary of State is near the bottom, 27 out of 41 or something.
Yeah, I think the problem with the Secretary of State and the Treasurer and Comptroller, to be candid, is that the comparisons are not worth so very much because the substance of the offices are so different.
I thought I heard someone suggest, and it sounded reasonable, that when we choose the governor's salary, that we apply that percentage increase to the Secretary of State.
That would be about a $10,000 increase.
Why is that? Just out of curiosity.
I'm not sure who said it, but why does it seem reasonable?
Yeah,
It's just a so that
a
there's
number.
yeah, so there's a playing field level, something that can rationalize. I think the Bruce's rationalization around members of Congress for the other constitutional offices made good sense. think we're gonna have to make a decision on the governor without such rationale. I think we're just gonna have to pick it.
Mhm.
And then to try to tie the Secretary of State to one or the other would seem to make sense.
And Mr. Chairman?
Can we flip back to where we can see each other? Oh, thank you.
You like that better?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just on that last point for
Oh, no, I do.
Mr. Tilden, if you applied the same rate to the Secretaries of State salary that would apply getting the Lieutenant Governor, Comptroller, AG, and Treasurer, from 149.5 to 174, that would take the Secretaries of State's salary from the current 105,500 to an ending salary of just under 123,000. So that would be over the 4 years, it's just over $17,000 increase, staying at that level. So that's where, if you peg it to that increase, that's where that would be. If you decide to go on the governor's, you have yet to decide what that might be, but that gives you at least that information.
If you tied it to the governor's same rate, it would only be about a $9,000 or $10,000 raise, not an $18,000 raise, right?
Depending on which one.
If we went to 195 with the governor.
So that would be about an 8.3% increase, and taking the Secretary of State would be 14.2, so yes, about 9,000, just under 10,000.
All right, so I'm gonna call that 115. I'm gonna recap numbers. 174 for the 4 middle constitutional officers, which I'm now calling them. 195 for the governor and 115 for the Secretary of State, which would be tied to the similar percentage as the governor would be getting.
I think it makes more sense to tie them to the other constitutional officers. Just a neat package.
Is it weird to give the Secretary of State an $18,000 raise and the governor only a $15,000 raise, though?
I don't think so, because I think people are going to be looking at the 195 and the 120 or whatever it is.
Okay.
Not,
So an 18 on top of 105 would be 123.5. What does this committee think about the Secretary of State's number? Should be somewhere between 115 and 123.5. Is there a number everyone's comfortable with?
What is it currently?
105.5.
I mean, what about 120?
yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
So now we have the 4 middle officers at 174, the governor at 195, and the Secretary of State as 120. But the question that this committee had earlier is whether to go straight to 174 or do steps, since they're getting the biggest raise. I don't know if the other two need steps,
What other two?
the governor and the Secretary of State. Their raises are not as substantial. But we could give everybody steps. Or we could just do the same pay for the whole 4 years and go 195, 174, 120.
I'm for steps.
Me too.
Okay.
Is there a reason, Bruce, that you suggested 174 as opposed to 175?
Really, truly, I looked at what the members of Congress were getting paid, and I was sitting there thinking, okay, so we've got our congressional delegation. And I'm comparing them and their responsibilities versus what these officers do. I mean, and that's what that's just how I came to the number. And then again, as I said, I looked at the circuit court judges and I thought, to me, certainly our officers shouldn't be paid less than that. So having said that, it doesn't matter to me whether it's 174 or 175.
We have this call scheduled for about 5 more minutes. If people think we're close to a consensus, we can keep going. And then we don't have to have a second meeting, or we could sleep on it and have a second meeting. Or if the treasurer or Ellie or anyone else has an idea on steps.
I have a pretty hard stop, no later than 5:35, Mr. Chair. So I don't want to hold up the group, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
I think it makes sense to have a second meeting just to ratify, just to look like we're not just rushing through.
Okay.
It wouldn't take long. Personally, I do like steps.
I also like the steps. And Bruce, would you?
Maura, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I said I also like the steps for really all of these officers, maybe with the exception of the Secretary of State. But for purposes of our thinking about this in the interim, I guess, Bruce, would you be willing to, based on Ellie's observation, amend your recommendation to 175, or should we keep it at 174? I mean, I think 175 makes sense just based on the observation about the circuit court judges and the fact that they're going to be at 174th, 300.
Jamar, you're learning that my logic never survives great scrutiny.
It's great logic.
175 it is. That's fine.
Right.
Okay.
I think the more important question is steps. And
Right.
Bruce, you would have to sort of amend. As I said at the beginning, I can go either way. So I hear the argument for steps for all of them, and I don't disagree.
May I just say that I could go with steps on the 3. I do think that the disparity is greater there for them, given
Right.
what their responsibility is and what they make. So if we incorporate stepping them up, I think there would have to be a really big jump in the first year for those 3 for me to be comfortable with it, to get them to a place where I think they deserve to be, to get to 175.
That's a great point.
That's what we did last time. In other words, we went from 150 to 180, but we didn't spread it out equally at 7,500 a year. We went like right to 165, and then 170, 175, 180, or something like that. And then we did $5,000 steps. So we could do, the first step could be 15 or 20, and then small steps.
Well, again, here's just a thought. They're at 149.5 now. How about if we took them to 165, and then to close the gap of the remaining $10,000, we just bumped them up at what would that be? You'd have to have.
How about
33.
160 and then 70 and 75?
No, you'd have to do
Oh, no, they're 4 years.
160, 165, 170,
170.
175.
They're 4 years.
I think 160 is low.
I agree
To
with
me,
that.
They need to go up for a start point. I was going to suggest start at 165 and then if that's what you want to do, and then have them go up to 175 over the 4-year period, with perhaps between now and the next meeting, staff could figure out what that would mean, on a step basis.
It's 33, 33. 3 times.
That's kind of what I figured, Bruce.
I mean, if you're doing it equally, it doesn't have to be equal.
Mhm.
It could be 5, it could be 165, 170, 172.5, 175, if you wanted to keep round numbers. No, I mean, if you could do 165, 170, 172.5, 175, and you're still doing your steps, but they're getting the bigger jumps in the front of it.
Oh. I mean, I think I agree with, I guess it was Bruce who suggested perhaps staff could help us
Okay.
maybe with some alternative steps that we could look at.
Okay, but I heard that Lindsay and Bruce want to start it at least 165. That 160 seems low after no raise for 4 years.
Yeah, I think 165 is probably the right number. It's where I am. I don't know if where others are.
I agree.
Good,
I like
good
that
for me.
number.
Could we have some alternatives?
Yeah, we'll have a second meeting because we're going to stop right now.
You could go to 165 for the first 2 years and 175 for the second 2 years.
You could do that too. They did that in the 2010 report.
I thought
You
that's.
don't need a
Okay.
step every year. Yeah, you could do 165, 165, and then 175, 175. We could do anything we want. We're the commission.
Great.
Well,
All
it
right.
sounds like we need to meet again for
Okay.
the reasons that the treasurer pointed out. But I'll just, I mean, again, I like the idea of, okay, starting at 165, bump them to 175 midterm, and we're done.
Yeah,
That's my thought.
keep it
So-
simple.
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend then if people are ready to pick a date
Okay.
before people have to leave.
All right. Did this time work again? 3:30 to 5:30?
Depends on the day.
Okay. Did we want to try and do this next week and knock this out?
Yes, that'd be helpful. I need to vote before we secede. Just kidding.
Today's
Crazy.
Monday.
You notice Montgomery County was cheering you on.
I imagine the next meeting won't be 2 hours. It'll probably
No,
be
no.
no more than half an
10
hour.
minutes, yeah.
Do we-
Mine next Monday afternoon is pretty jammed.
Okay. What, throw out some dates.
Tuesday after 2.
Okay. How's everybody on Tuesday?
That is spending affordability that day,
Mhm.
just to be aware.
When is that meeting?
Be 3 p.m.
Okay.
So yeah, you'd be done if you.
It would be good.
Would be done if we start when? 2?
And the other thing is I'll probably have to do it by phone if that's okay.
I have something that it may be hard for me to start at 2. I could do 2:30. When did you need to be done? By 3?
We don't need it. I don't have a hard stop because I won't be presenting till later in the meeting. So 2:30 would work if it works for everybody.
I just don't want to be late because I have something out of the office midday.
Absolutely.
How does 2:30 next Tuesday look for everybody?
It's
That
good.
works for me.
Good for me.
This is a great committee to work with.
And we will get you something to look at before that meeting. We'll circulate and, obviously, you can communicate with email. Let us know if you have anything else.
Does the governor have any interest in this? I mean, have you all heard that he's?
No
would
memo?
like to see it? I mean, it's not his salary, I know,
Right.
but
It's
at
gonna
times,
matter.
No, typically, the governor has not weighed in on the governor's salary commission other than years in which the request has been made for the other constitutional officers. I mean, that was one of the reasons it was, I think, taken out of the kind of personal realm and put into a, non-elected committee, for that.
right,
And-
yeah.
And Steve, between now and Tuesday, any member of this committee that has a question can either email the full committee or you or Ken directly, right?
Yes, and we'll be happy to, direct it if you want to send it and send a reply to everybody. So, everybody gets the same information.
And would you recirculate the letter to get sworn in? It's because
Oh, yes.
we
I
all
don't-
have to get sworn in before we sign off on this.
Uh-huh. Well, that would have been, are there materials that you sent? I don't recall seeing anything do we have to have something signed?
There's a conflict of interest statement you should
Right. Have I
recirculate.
done that?
Okay.
But there's nothing we have to take to the clerk, to the,
There's a
commission.
letter of administration, a letter of appointment that you're supposed to take to the clerk, right, Steve? Okay.
Maybe you could give us our directions as to what we're supposed to do here.
Okay. We
Do
will,
we have to find a court clerk?
I think it's just your local, yes, your,
I know it's been hard in some instances, but anyway, but that's okay.
They're all open now. I think you should be able to go in and get sworn in.
Mr. Chair, everybody, I'm sorry, I have to.
No,
I
we're
have to go.
sorry. I didn't expect it to go this long. Thank you all.
See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right, I guess we're adjourned.
Bye.
Bye.